Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
You know, Noah Rothman, I know you have a question for Dave Aronberg, but I'm just curious what your take is on John Bolton first. Do you think we're going to see John Bolton testify?
Probably not at this stage. There's just no appetite for it among Republicans, even though I think he really should. But also, I mean, this is part of what I think is probably a pretty clear Democratic failure in their strategy. I mean, we were talking about how there's all this cosmetic disunity among Republicans earlier in the hour. The real effective disunity we've seen in impeachment has been from Democrats. Democrats have cast votes against the articles. And now we're seeing Democrats arguing essentially with themselves over how a Senate trial should look, but essentially conceding that the impeachment inquiry phase was rushed. We got a favorable ruling from Democrats on the McGahn subpoena. And in the appeals court, they said, listen, the articles have passed. Do we even need to deal with this anymore? The venue where he's supposed to testify is essentially shut. And the Democrats are now arguing that even though they didn't, the process is done, they still want to hear these witnesses testify. It's a very similar story with John Bolton. The argument the Democrats are now making, Danny, I think you would probably agree, is that because we had this very urgent issue on our hands that you needed to pass these impeachment articles as soon as possible and move on to the trial phase, they're now arguing to slow everything down. It sort of exposes the fact that the real problem for Democrats was that a lot of their members were very uncomfortable with the impeachment process.
Exactly right. No, I totally agree. And that's the challenge with these congressional subpoenas, is that there's the additional dilemma for Congress of, do we want to take this battle to the courts, knowing that time alone will probably run out the clock and the administration will likely win. So they have to have an additional layer of strategy. But keep in mind that theoretically the House could impeach on additional information. Right. The fact that these are delayed, the delivery of the articles of impeachment, could allow the House to continue investigation. And then, of course, the Senate theoretically could subpoena witnesses as well. These are all things that could bring this conflict right back into the light.
Yamish has a question for Dave Aronberg. Yamish.
Good morning, David. I have a question about the judge's writing. He wrote that he would essentially have had to balance both Congress's will to want to investigate with the White House's essentially their ability to want to remain private and have executive privilege. When we look at kind of going forward, is any judge going to want to touch this? Is any judge going to want to say, at least in a timely way, this is who wins here? And how realistic is it for us to see anybody be forced, actually legally forced into testifying, given this judge's ruling?
Yeah, Yamish, I think the key ruling, as Danny said, is the Don McGahn case. Judge Ketanji Brown came out with a very powerful ruling that sets the precedent in cases of executive branch testimony, saying that Don McGahn needed to testify that the claims of all this immunity didn't hold any water. And that's why that even if John Bolton is subpoenaed and even if he says that, hey, he is going to fight it in the courts, it's a bad look for him. And I think he's going to lose because the key precedent now is that Don McGahn case. And so I think it's going to be a loser. Now, as far as what was said earlier from Noah, the Democrats really had no choice, because if they fought the subpoenas all the way up to the Supreme Court, we'd be in mid-2020, late 2020, and the public didn't have the stomach to have an impeachment trial right before the election. So John Bolton and his lawyer, who actually is the same lawyer for Kupperman, left the Democrats with no choice. They had to move on. And by the way, there was nothing to prevent John Bolton from testifying voluntarily like his subordinates did, Dr. Fiona Hill. That was the patriotic thing to do. But instead, John Bolton decided to monetize his testimony by getting his $2 million advance from Simon & Schuster in his upcoming book.
So Dave, if Kupperman now is moot and the judge has decided that case is not going to move forward, McGahn is the precedent, right? And if McGahn is the precedent, then in the future, people in the position of John Bolton will need to go testify. And whether they are granted immunity or not will depend on the situation.
Well, I think that's right, except the McGahn case is on appeal, but it's still precedent. And so until that is eventually decided, that's out there. Now, John Bolton could still say, well, I'm going to, the Kupperman case was dismissed because it was moot. If I'm subpoenaed, I'm going to take it up the chain. But again, it's a bad look for him. And I think that he should stop making excuses. He should go ahead and start doing the right thing and being patriotic and testify. Also, another thing is, by not subpoenaing him beforehand, the Senate could now subpoena him, and then it would be up to Chief Justice Roberts to make that decision. So you wouldn't have to wait till it goes all the way up the court ladder. It is, I think, an interesting strategy to say we're not going to subpoena Bolton during the investigation, but we're going to leave it up to the Senate to subpoena him. Of course, if you don't get 4 Republican senators to go along, there is no subpoena, there is no Bolton testimony, and the whole thing doesn't happen. But there at least is a chance in the Senate, whereas if you did in the House, it would take a year to get a final decision on it.
It is Friday, the 3rd of January of 2020. And you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Well, please help yourself to the French 77s. They are all prepared and ready for your imbibing pleasure, because, hey, we're at war. Oh, you didn't know? Yes, we are. I know it's not really a declared war because only Lindsey Graham was consulted, but at least someone in Congress was. Lindsey just happened to be at Mar-a-Lago, and somebody told him, hey, yeah, we're going to kill this guy in Iraq. And then we're going to go to war with Iran. And Lindsey said, I'm glad to be part of this orbit. Of course he does, because if there's a war, Lindsey's going to be first in line to, well, call for all those young kids to go to war. Lindsey's not going, but he'll be first in line to tell everybody, hey, you better get going. Get going now. All right, well, I'm not happy about this. I am continuing to be quite upset that apparently the Democrats aren't considered to be Americans, so they don't need to be consulted. The Democrats don't need to know any of this because the Democrats are the enemy. This is where we are in this country now. They being the Republican Party is not the loyal opposition. We are the loyal opposition, and yet we are marginalized, pretty much shat upon every step of the way, and any kind of involvement in our government is considered suspect. Well, I suppose the New York Times better go interview some Philadelphia diners who have voted for Trump to find out what they think. Because apparently Nancy Pelosi, not being informed as per the AUMF, the authorization to use military force, specifies that in an operation such as this, she needs to be informed. Telling Lindsey Graham while he's drinking at Mar-a-Lago is not the same thing. And as David pointed out in the beginning of his show, Trump doesn't even know who Soleimani is. He didn't know who the Cuds were. Well, maybe he did. You know, he was laundering money for the Iranian guard there, Red Guard. And Soleimani was the head of that operation. Trump wanted to get a Trump hotel, a Trump tower built, or at least put into his name. And he was working with that family and laundering their money, and Soleimani ran that operation. And now he's dead. And it's called a defensive maneuver, to always kill your rival first. Mob bosses do that. This seems less about foreign policy and more about being a mob boss. And would he be so trite to wag the dog because of the impeachment? To wag the dog because these emails were released that showed that the order to withhold funding to the Ukraine came directly from his mouth? Would he be so trite to do that? Yes. Yes, he would. We're talking Donald Trump. Jeez, there's no mystery there. What's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Well, at the top, that was Florida State Attorney Dave Aronberg smacking down Noah Rothman's assertion that Dems are in disarray and bungling the impeachment. Oh, yeah, of course, we're doing it all wrong because the Republicans don't like it, obviously. On the rest of the menu in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, Trump's judicial advisor is tied to a secretive network of dark money dedicated to putting far-right justices on the Supreme Court. Well, of course, the Federalist Society and quite a few others, and we'll go down that list. 205 GOP members of Congress told the Supreme Court to overrule a woman's right to abortion. Hey, 205 between the House and the Senate. We'll see how they fare in the election with that little signing party. And Paul Manafort told the FBI he knew he had no chance at trial when he pleaded guilty in Mueller's Russia investigation. And yes, it is still the Russia investigation. After the break, we then move to the chef's table, where the leader of a right-wing militia group accused of illegally detaining immigrants has pleaded guilty to federal weapons charges. And Boris Johnson's Brexit-mastermind is on the lookout for weirdos and misfits with odd skills to help bring weird and odd ideas to Britain's government. More odd and weird than Boris Johnson? You know, they say the sun never sets on that empire. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the rightish of the page is our chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and thank you, Kelly. To the leftish of the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will then notice the link to our Patreon page. And all kidding aside, please do become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, now more than ever. Without your generosity, we would be unable to power this, powerhouse of resistance. And your generosity has allowed us to fulfill our civic duty all these many years, going on 9 now. 9 years of continuous 24/7, 365 resistance broadcasting. So if you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, the funds sent of that our way. If you could send that amount once a month, that would be so helpful to us. And then we could continue resisting, really, as the founders originally intended all those many, 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 many decades ago. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Thank you, Tom, for taking care of that. I, of course, take care of at Justice Putnam, so you might as well follow me there. I also post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime, and then link that up on social media for everybody's social media linkage pleasure. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts. The most important part of this spiel is pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever fine podcasts can be found, mixed in with all the rest of us. And there's billions of them. Billions! We are down in the W's. So just go to W. All right? Just go there and you'll find us. W-E. All right, let's get into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. And Alex Henderson of Alternet brings us this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe. One of the main reasons for Trump's unwavering popularity with the Christian right is judicial appointments, in addition to bringing a long list of socially conservative judges to the lower federal courts. Trump has so far appointed 2 U.S. Supreme Court justices, Gorsuch in 17 and Kavanaugh in 18. The Center for Responsive Politics, Anna Masoglia, in a January 2nd article for the Center's Open Secrets website, examines the secretive network and dark money associated with Trump's high court picks. At the crux of the secretive network, according to Masoglia, is the Federalist Society's Leonard Leo, who has been serving as a legal advisor for Trump. Leo, she notes, helped shepherd Trump's Supreme Court picks through the confirmation process and holds leadership positions with multiple groups in the network. An important part of the network, she observed, is the dark money group, the Judicial Crisis Network, which she says operates as the preeminent vehicle for deep-pocketed donors to funnel millions of dollars to support or oppose judicial nominees in Supreme Court confirmation fights. Wow. Is that the reason that Merrick Garland was held up? He didn't really pass muster with the right-wing fascists funding these efforts? Yes, they are fascists. Let's stop beating around the bush on this stuff, please. In 2017, the Judicial Crisis Network spent $10 million to boost Gorsuch's Supreme Court confirmation, mostly on TV ads. You know, people don't vote for the Supreme Court nominees. Senators do. The bulk of Judicial Crisis Network's funding over the past decade came from the Wellspring Committee, a secretly funded group that served as a longtime linchpin of the opaque network before shutting down at the end of 2018. Wellspring took in $2.3 million during its final year, distributing most of that through grants before shutting down completely at the end of 2018. Before shutting down, Wellspring distributed its remaining $34,777 to the Judicial Crisis Network. Another part of the network is the Judicial Education Project, which is the Judicial Crisis Network's charitable nonprofit. In addition to shuffling money among interlocking groups tied to Leo, Masoglia writes, nonprofits in the network also shelled out millions of dollars to consultants and other dark money groups, many of which supported Kavanaugh's confirmation to the Supreme Court. For example, the Leo-associated group America Engaged funneled another $3 million to the Koch Network's Freedom Partners. Singer of the American Independent brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. A total of 39 Republican senators and 166 Republican House members on Thursday yesterday asked the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade, the landmark case that cemented the right to abortion in the United States. Asked. I think they're telling them. Actually, I think it's what a couple of justices on that Supreme Court really want to hear. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Neil. I'm looking at you. Yes, you. And Brett. Look at the big brain on Brett. In an amicus brief, a legal document that interested parties sent to the Supreme Court to influence opinions, the members of Congress called Roe unworkable and urged the court to reconsider and overrule the precedent set in that decision. Of course, the vast majority of Americans would like to have abortion rights, but a small minority of Republicans who are Christo-fascists don't want it. And they don't care what the majority feels because apparently the majority are Satan worshippers and America's going to hell. And Bill Barr is there to right the wrongs. He'll lead them into the promised land. In the brief, the members argue that current laws create confusion for lawmakers and that this illustrates the unworkability of the right to abortion found in Roe and the need for the court to take up the issue of whether Roe and Casey should be reconsidered and, if appropriate, overruled. Now, Casey refers to the landmark 1992 decision, Planned Parenthood v. Casey, which invalidated anti-abortion laws that created an undue burden on those seeking abortions. Isn't it rich, though, that they claim that the laws, surrounding Roe v. Wade are so confusing? Who made those confusing laws in the first place? To circumvent the law of the land. Who did that? We know who did. The brief comes before the Supreme Court is set to hear arguments on an anti-abortion law in Louisiana that requires abortion providers to have admitting privileges at nearby hospitals. You know, the kind of admitting privileges at hospitals in which there has to be a janitor closet every 12 feet. If there's no janitor closet every 12 feet, you're not a hospital, and you can't give women the health care they need. Republican-controlled legislatures have passed a series of extreme anti-abortion laws that not only ban the procedure but also criminalizing it, raising the specter of jail time for doctors who perform abortions. My, that seems like a confusing law surrounding Roe. We'll have to get rid of Roe then, don't we? In Alabama, for example, Republican lawmakers tried to ban abortion in all cases, including rape and incest, and raised the possibility that abortion-providing doctors could go to jail for 99 years. Well, that law was temporarily blocked as a legal challenge makes its way through the courts. Temporarily blocked? Right-wing lawmakers have used these extreme abortion bans to try to get the courts to reconsider landmark abortion cases such as Roe v. Wade, and they hope that Brett Kavanaugh replacing swing vote Anthony Kennedy on the court will help achieve that goal. Meanwhile, polls show support for abortion increased following the extreme anti-abortion laws Republicans have passed across the country. In June, shortly after the Alabama law caused a nationwide uproar, 56% of Americans said abortion should be legal all or most of the time. An Associated Press poll published yesterday, Thursday, found 45% oppose making abortion illegal in most cases, while the typical toxic 37% approve. Eric Tucker and Michael Balsamo of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort said he knew he had no chance at trial when he pleaded guilty in special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation, according to a summary of an interview with investigators that was made public yesterday, Thursday. When he saw the jury pool questionnaire for the trial in the District of Columbia, Manafort knew it was over, an FBI agent wrote in summarizing the interview. He struck 90 of the 120 potential jurors based on their answers and thought the rest were lying. Between the judge and the jury, the agent wrote, Manafort thought he had no chance at trial. By that point, Manafort had pleaded guilty in Washington's federal court and had been found guilty by a jury in Virginia of similar financial charges. He is now serving more than 7 years in prison. The write-up of the October 2018 interview was among hundreds of pages of heavily redacted documents released by the Justice Department in response to public records lawsuits from BuzzFeed News and CNN. It was the third such disclosure of records, all consisting of summaries of interviews FBI agents and Mueller team members did with witnesses, including key aides and confidants of Donald Trump. Separately, Manafort made clear that Trump's distrust of the FBI and the Justice Department predates his presidency and the investigation into ties between his presidential campaign and Russia. Well, of course, Trump has been laundering money for mobsters for decades. Why else do you think he would not trust the FBI? Does any mobster trust the FBI? Trump said it was a rigged system and signaled the politicization of the Department of Justice, the agent wrote. They talked about how to use it in their campaign, saying that the fix was in between then Attorney General Loretta Lynch and the Clintons. Manafort said he never expected Trump to keep Comey in the position based on his feelings about his actions in 2016. Manafort and Trump had conversations in which they said Comey was a political partisan. So political, he divulged the Hillary Clinton email issue that kept her from being elected in the days just before the vote. That's how partisan he is. But not partisan enough for Trump because he refused to kiss his ass. Trump thought it was a joke when people said Comey was a Republican and never viewed him as a Republican. Trump thought Comey had made his bed with the Obama administration and was part of the other team. You know, the American team. Comey was fired in May 2017, and the documents released include statements from multiple witnesses describing both the lead-up to that decision and the fallout afterward. Trump aide Stephen Miller, for instance, described working with Trump on a draft letter informing Comey that he was fired. A separate memo was ultimately drafted by then Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and released by the White House as justification for Comey's firing. You know, he didn't do the Hillary investigation perfect enough. So I had to get rid of him. He was too hard on Hillary, so they had to get rid of him. Sure, that was a great excuse. Former White House spokesperson Sarah Sanders, did you know that they're kicking Meghan McCain off and they're going to give the position to the perfect smoky eye? Yeah. Well, Sanders told investigators she had no basis for her comment after Comey was fired that countless FBI agents had lost confidence in him. Udom Dillon, a former White House lawyer and the current acting administrator of the DEA, told investigators that White House attorneys had warned Trump not to contact Comey directly while he was in his job because it could create the perception he was interfering with investigations. Well, mobsters don't care about how it looks. They just want results. He also described how former White House counsel Don McGahn tried to persuade Trump to remove Comey's termination letter a reference to Comey having told him 3 times that he was not under investigation, but it seemed to be the most important part of the letter to Trump, and he insisted on keeping it in. Dillon also told investigators that Trump told him and McGahn that his communications team could not get the story right, so he was going to do an interview with NBC's Lester Holt to say what really happened. During that interview, Trump said he was thinking of the Russia thing when he decided to fire Comey. Yeah, remember that? He essentially, confessed on live television. Also included in the disclosure was a write-up of an FBI interview with Jerome Corsi, a conservative writer who he was himself scrutinized during Mueller's investigation and told reporters that he had turned down a plea offer. Corsi suggested to investigators that he had advanced knowledge of an infamous Access Hollywood recording from 2005 in which Trump can be heard making lewd and profane comments about women. You know, the grab a right by the P word that was disclosed by the Washington Post in October of 2016. He remembered the line about Trump grabbing by the genitals and being shocked by it. When it came out publicly later that day, Corsi was not shocked by it because he expected it, the documents say. Corsi told Mueller's team that he believed he had mentioned the tape on a WorldNet daily conference call on October 7th of 2016, saying the recording was coming, and sent out a tweet about whether anyone could get WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. But Corsi said he may have done nothing. Yeah, Jerome Corsi, you know, the Swift boat guy? Oh, you don't know that? Well, you do now. All right, let's get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we are going to go through weather from around the world. And we are going to finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, Fox Meet Henhouse. One of the characters in Jay Roach's new movie Bombshell describes Fox News as a, quote, nostalgia machine for a lost America. That machine has always had near its heart, along with racism and corporatism, sexism. In the America for which certain people pine, the abuse it documents is not a problem. There's nothing to see here. But for the rest of us, Me Too is here, even overdue, and in Bombshell, worlds collide as the culture of abuse, led by the late Fox News chief Roger Ailes, runs into trouble with 3 women at the network. One is the established anchor Gretchen Carlson, who's aging out of Ailes' fantasies. Another is Megyn Kelly, his current fave. And the third, a composite character, Kayla, who represents a future prospect. It's a symmetrical way to tell the story, and the 3 actors who portray the women, Nicole Kidman, Charlize Theron, and Margot Robbie, respectively, are perfect, and indeed make the movie. Extra kudos are probably due Theron for a total character capture, an even tougher job when portraying a known figure contemporaneously. If you follow the story or perhaps watch the Showtime miniseries The Loudest Voice, there's not much new here. The miniseries actually gives more background and perspective. Both, however, let the heroes off the hook too easily. That Fox News world I mentioned a minute ago? Well, that's the world where Carlson and Kelly built their careers and stature. Yet there seems to be little dot connecting between the overarching Fox message and what happened to them, let alone soul-searching, even as Ailes gets what he deserves. Bombshell tells its story with humor and panache, but the comeuppance is too concentrated. Sadly, the real outcome is that the poison of Fox News rolls on. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Steve Mirsky. Happy New Year! And if you've been away from work for a few days, you deserve some time off. After all, you've traveled far. even if you just stayed at home. According to NASA, just by being on the planet Earth in the last year, you zipped about 584 million miles around the sun at an average speed of about 67,000 miles per hour. Hey, I wasn't speeding, in my inertial reference frame. Of course, the trip was not a perfect circle. As Kepler showed, the Earth's orbit is an ellipse, with the sun at one of the two focal points. He also figured out the planet goes faster when it's at perihelion, nearer the sun, than when it's at aphelion, its furthest distance, which would explain why summer seems to zip by, except that the seasons are a function of the tilt of the Earth's axis, not its different distances from the sun. And the Earth rotated 365.25 times during its sweep around the sun. The trip took 8,766 hours, or 525,960 minutes, or 31,557,600 seconds. Tick-tock. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Steve Mirsky.
I'm probably okay to have one more drink before I drive home. I'm probably okay. I open the window to stay alert. Probably okay. I just popped some gum in my mouth.
Step out of the car, please.
I probably made a mistake.
Probably okay isn't okay when it comes to drinking and driving. If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend. Buzzed driving is drunk driving. A message brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
In 2012 in the United States, about 317,000 motor vehicle crashes involved a large truck. 26,000 truck drivers and their passengers were injured in these crashes, and about 700 died. Trucker safety requires an alert, buckled-up, experienced driver with a reliable vehicle and a strong employer safety program. Seatbelts are the most effective way to prevent an injury or death in a motor vehicle crash, but in 2013, 1 in 6 drivers of large trucks didn't use their seatbelts. Employers can help truck drivers stay safe by committing to driver safety programs at the highest level of leadership, establishing and enforcing driver safety policies, including requiring everyone in the truck to buckle up, and addressing factors that contribute to crashes, such as drowsy and distracted driving. To learn more, visit cdc.gov/vital signs.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
What does the Constitution say should happen, must happen, after the House of Representatives impeaches a president? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Article 1 of the Constitution, which sets forth the powers of the Congress, says the Senate shall have the sole power to try impeachments, and, when sitting for that purpose, they shall be on oath or affirmation. The oath that each senator must take in the impeachment trial of a president comes from the Senate's rules on impeachment and says this: I solemnly swear or affirm, in all things appertaining to the trial of, insert name, now pending, I will do impartial justice according to the Constitution and the laws, so help me God. To do impartial justice, that's the requirement for each senator sitting as a trial juror, which means that each senator has the obligation to evaluate the evidence impartially and objectively and not politically, and to decide whether the president has committed a high crime or misdemeanor. High crime or misdemeanor being a term of art that means, in Hamilton's words, an abuse or violation of the public trust. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. That was the day the trial against labor leader Tom Mooney began. Mooney stood accused of detonating a bomb at the Preparedness Day parade in San Francisco on July 22, 1916. The military parade was meant to demonstrate U.S. preparedness to enter World War I. Many labor leaders objected to the idea of the United States becoming involved in the war. The bomb in San Francisco killed 10 spectators and injured 40 others. District Attorney Charles Fickert soon charged Mooney, his wife Rena, and his assistant Warren Billing with the crime. Mooney, born in Chicago, was the son of a coal miner. He became an iron molder at the age of 14, where he joined the Union. Known for his socialist politics, Mooney was involved in a long, bitter strike against the Pacific Gas and Electric Company in 1913 that spanned well into 1914. He was accused of trying to use dynamite during that strike, but was acquitted. After the explosion at the San Francisco parade, Martin Swanson, a private detective with the Pacific Gas and Electric Company, pointed the district attorney toward Mooney. There was no evidence tying Billings or Mooney to the explosion. During the trial, some who testified against Mooney even admitted to committing perjury on the stand. Despite all of this, the men were convicted. Billings received life in prison, while Mooney was sentenced to hang. The trial garnered international outrage. President Woodrow Wilson set up a commission to study the case. Mooney's sentence was commuted to life in prison. For 2 decades, a fight was waged to release Mooney. Finally, the evidence of false testimony piled so high it could not be ignored. And in 1939, Billings and Mooney were released from prison. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
I read the news today, oh boy.
It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
Donald Trump foreshadowed his own acts of desperation on Twitter just before the 2012 elections. He tweeted on October 9th, 2012, quote, "Now that Obama's poll numbers are in tailspin, watch for him to launch a strike in Libya or Iran. He is desperate." Yeah. 2 weeks later, he tweeted, "Don't let Obama play the Iran card in order to start a war in order to get elected. Be careful, Republicans." So we know how his demented mind works, or doesn't. In his warped world, this makes sense. On Thursday night, the Pentagon confirmed that a U.S. airstrike at an airport in Baghdad, ordered by Donald Trump, killed Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Quds Force, the number 2 guy in Iran, just behind the Ayatollah. NBC News Tehran bureau chief Ali Arouzi explained just how serious this move is.
I would be very surprised if there isn't some sort of a very serious reprisal from Iran over this. They are going to want to show that they haven't been weakened by the death of Soleimani. They want to show that the IRGC is still very strong and operational, so they will probably strike back. I don't think this is acted as a deterrent. I think this is just going to aggravate the situation much further. As I mentioned to you, Rachel, he is a cult figure in Iran amongst the ruling establishment. They rely very, very heavily on him. He controls all the militias in that region that have made Iran so powerful in that region. So they are going to take this extraordinarily seriously. I'm not sure what kind of a reprisal they're going to unleash, but as you well know, they have multiple groups of proxies spread across the entire region, ready for a moment like this. So this has ratcheted up the stakes hugely. This is probably one of the most significant incidents I've seen happen in Iran over the last couple of decades.
Iranian state TV has cut all broadcasts and is showing pictures of Soleimani on a loop, accompanied by prayers. So what prompted Donald Trump to do this? Well, as pointed out above, he thinks this is a political advantage. Secondly, in true wag the dog fashion, Trump has been impeached and is waiting to find out when his trial in the Senate will begin. And Just Security had the big story of the day until this news broke of unredacted Ukraine documents that clearly show the order to keep the freeze in place came directly from Donald Trump himself. Officially, The Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, is claiming the strike was, quote, decisive defensive action, adding, quote, General Soleimani was actively developing plans to attack American diplomats and service members in Iraq and throughout the region. This strike was aimed at deterring future Iranian attack plans, end quote. So Iran confirmed the death of one of its most active military figures and vowed revenge against the United States. Iran's supreme leader, the Ayatollah, said in a statement Friday that Soleimani's death was, quote, bitter, but that the final victory will make life more bitter for the murderers and criminals. The entire chain of events appears to have been set in motion by a December 27th rocket attack that killed a U.S. contractor on a base in the Iraqi city of Kirkuk, which the Pentagon blamed on Kataib Hezbollah, an Iraqi militia closely associated with Iran. After the attack, Trump authorized airstrikes on militia targets in Iraq and Syria, which in turn prompted militiamen to attempt to breach the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. The president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, tweeted, "The flag of General Soleimani in defense of the country's territorial integrity and the fight against terrorism and extremists in the region will be raised, and the path of resistance to U.S. excesses will continue. The great nation of Iran will take revenge for this heinous crime." And in related news, the State Department has advised all American citizens to leave Iraq, every last one of them. So Trump and his advisors think the assassination of a country's second in command is proper retaliation for a strike that killed a single contractor? Stay tuned. I never should have said anything yesterday about it being a slow news day. In other news, the Senate is due back in session Friday, with Mitch McConnell set to give his first floor speech of the new decade, in which he'll try to take control of the upcoming impeachment trial. But with the new unredacted documents released Thursday that clearly state that Trump was the person who directly ordered a freeze on aid to Ukraine, the Republicans will have a more difficult time defending their stance on calling no witnesses during the impeachment trial in the Senate. Meanwhile, Nancy Pelosi still has not sent over those 2 articles of impeachment to the Senate. The House returns from its winter break on Monday. BuzzFeed News on Friday is publishing the 3rd installment of Robert Mueller's secret memos, which are being turned over as part of Jason Leopold's brilliant FOIA strategy. These memos include new details about Stephen Miller's involvement in drafting the letter firing then FBI Director James Comey, and how Paul Manafort believed Donald Trump was sending him messages through Sean Hannity while Manafort was in jail. Oy. More Q4 fundraising numbers are out. Amy Klobuchar announcing she raised more than $11.4 million in the Q4, her best fundraising period yet, and more than double the $4.8 million she raised in Q3, but still quite far behind the top 4 contenders. Donald Trump on Thursday announced a nationwide ban of all vape flavors except tobacco and menthol. The move would, though, exclude refillable vaporizer liquid flavors, also sold in vape shops. And finally, elections have serious consequences. More than 200 members of Congress on Thursday signed a friend of the court brief filed at the Supreme Court in connection with a challenge to a Louisiana abortion access law that will be heard in March, urging the court to reconsider, if not overrule, the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision that legalized abortion nationwide. The letter was signed by 39 Republican senators and 168 members of the House, all but 2 of them Republicans. By the way, the 2 siding with the Republicans are Colin Peterson of Minnesota and Dan Lipinski of Illinois. Lipinski is thankfully again being primaried by Marie Newman. Hopefully she'll win. I got good news. And that's just a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, and I can't do it without your help. Find out more at NicoleSandler.com/donate.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 34 degrees Fahrenheit. We are expected to be a tad warmer than yesterday. It almost got downright balmy yesterday. Definitely bumped at 50 degrees, maybe a tad warmer. Today we're expected to be in the mid-50s. Overnight lows in the mid-30s. Right now winds are light and variable out of the east-southeast and will pick up to 5 to 10 miles per hour in just a couple of hours. There is a current wind advisory in the area. Not at the mothership proper, but more down southern, in the southern area below the mothership, around Medford, Astoria, all the way into California to Weed and Shasta. They are expecting to have high winds, and do be careful if you have one of those high-profile vehicles that could topple over. And if you're by one of those high-profile vehicles, maybe you don't want to be by it, okay? So take care. Expecting about a half an inch of rain later on this afternoon, and winds will then be shifted out of the southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And then tomorrow we're expecting, well, a high in only the mid-40s with overnight lows in the mid-30s. And will be partly cloudy, winds light and variable, and then about another third of an inch of rain beginning on Sunday, possibly with a mix of snow. We'll look into that and what happened when we meet up on Monday. We will. Let's see. Pollen is rated at none. The air quality index is moderate. It has gone up a few notches at 68 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is low at 1. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.16 inches. Visibility is down to 5 miles. And relative humidity is at 92%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 48 degrees and sunny. Paris is 53 and cloudy. Rome is 58 and sunny. Kyiv is 32 and fair. Kabul is 27 and cloudy. Hong Kong is 61 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 41 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 73 degrees and clear, though there's lots of smoke on that continent, going all the way to New Zealand and beyond. New York, let's not get to New York. We have to hit San Francisco first, and they are 48 and partly cloudy. And New York is 46 degrees Fahrenheit with rain showers. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property. And these people positively live around the world. Dan Whitcomb and Julio Cesar Chavez. No, not that one. The other one. And both of those reporters are from Reuters, and they both bring us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. The leader of a small right-wing militia accused of illegally detaining immigrants as they crossed the U.S. border with Mexico pleaded guilty yesterday, Thursday, to federal weapons charges. Larry Hopkins, age 70, agreed to plead guilty to an indictment charging him with being a felon in possession of a firearm because he, quote, felt like he had made his point, end quote, to the U.S. government, his attorney Kelly O'Connell said in an interview. He had agreed that he was guilty of it, and felon in possession is a pretty easy crime to prove, lawyer O'Connell said. A U.S. attorney spokeswoman said that during a hearing in federal court in Albuquerque, Hopkins had admitted to being in possession of 9 firearms and ammunition for those weapons at the time of his arrest in April. Hopkins, who has 4 previous felony convictions, faces a maximum sentence of 10 years in federal prison, a $250,000 in fines and penalties, and 3 years of supervised release. He is scheduled to be sentenced in the coming months. Hopkins is a leader of the United Constitutional Patriots, a group the American Civil Liberties Union and other critics have accused of illegally detaining migrants by impersonating law enforcement.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
The ever-present anonymous worker bees at Reuters bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The senior advisor to Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who plotted Brexit and steered his boss to last month's election triumph, is on the lookout for weirdos and misfits with odd skills to help bring new ideas to Britain's government. We want to improve performance and make me much less important and within a year largely redundant, Dominic Cummings said in a post on his blog. We do not have the sort of expertise supporting the PM and ministers that is needed. This must change fast so we can properly serve the public, and since the public is filled with misfits and weirdos, we need them. Cummings, who has made no secret of his disdain for much of the way Britain's civil service operates, said he had been lucky to have worked with some fantastic officials in recent months, but there are also some profound problems at the core of how the British state makes decisions. That's why we need misfits and weirdos. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, and guess what? The week. But we're going to meet up on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned in Netroots Radio all day and all night and all weekend for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte goët. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus d'être tendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.